On this week's show, we'll be talking about Piers Morgan's unprovoked attack against a tattooed head teacher who he called Woke Tattoo Boy.
And can schoolhouses be named after dead white men?
We're also, of course, going to be thinking about the case of the missing consultation, the fact that after weeks and weeks of getting people to give their views, the government appears to have shrugged its collective shoulders and asked schools to do whatever the hell they like when it comes to this year's assessments for students.
Yeah, validity or reliability. What's the balance between those two things? And are masks part of school uniform? Who makes the rules? That's this week on It's Your Time You're Wasting.
Welcome to episode 6, season 2 of It's Your Time You're Wasting. And Martin, it seems like there's been an enormous amount of time wasted this week, doesn't it?
It's a wonderful week of wasting time. It was all the alliteration, making my lips go sore there.
Yeah, how are your lips this week, Martin?
My lips are a bit chapped. I've been out on the old bike, you know.
The question on everyone's
Lips.
That's the word. So, Martin, lots to talk about this week. Most of it, or a good deal of it, to do with tattoos. And so, we're going to
Without further ado,
should Martin? You've got views on this. Should teachers have tattoos?
of course not. I mean, goodness sake! I mean, you've looked at the Beano, haven't you? You've seen the Beano. I've got a picture here from the Beano itself. You know, there it is. Now, the Beano.
Well, sorry, no, nobody saw that.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine the teacher in the Beano having a tattoo, or the head teacher? I come from I think it's a generational thing. I think it's a certain idea that teachers shouldn't have tattoos and they should have short hair, short back and sides, and things like that, and standards. You know, standards. Don't you think?
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, I confess, I had a tattoo when I started as a teacher.
Yeah, come on. Now, I think we should see this tattoo. Come
Well,
on.
on Twitter there was. We'll talk about this in a moment, but on Twitter this week there was. Teachers were encouraged to share their tattoos under the hashtag #EduTattoo, and I wagered that I had the worst tattoo of any teacher at all. And I will briefly.
Here we go, folks.
For those who are
So inclined.
there is my awful tattoo. It's not a thing of beauty.
Geez, can I say actually just one thing there? I think that would be really helpful for when you get your jab, because it's right in the center there where the jab could in fact go. The little prick straight in there.
Enough from you about little pricks, Martin. Yeah, no, I've got my vaccination booked actually for next week.
Wow, how come?
I don't know. They got in touch and went, "You look like a particularly sickly specimen."
You're younger than me by ages. I should be there before you.
My 17-year-old daughter had a vaccination this week.
Yeah, it's all going horribly wrong. It's meant to be going down by the ages.
It's extraordinary.
Well, I'm very upset. I'm now going to write to my MP.
Write to the MP and ask them if they've got a tattoo.
Anyway,
so before I was so rudely derailed there. My tattoo is it's 30 years old or thereabouts, and as you can see, pretty faded. But then I went to a tattoo parlor, and I think you call them parlors still. I don't know. But I went there and I said what I wanted, and the chap said something along the lines of that'll be 20 quid, and I said I've only got £8, and he went, all right then. And you get what you pay for. I think it's fair to say. But lots and lots. If you want to explore the wonderful world of teachers with tattoos, you can look at the hashtag #EduTattoo. What do you call a thing with linked to a hashtag? Is there a word for that?
It's a hashtag.
It's a hashtag. There we are. Thank you for clearing that up.
I don't know. I'm trying to get down with the kids' parlors these days, you know.
As we alluded to in the opener, this all stemmed from this is a reaction to everybody's favourite rabid lunatic, Piers Morgan, dismissing head teacher Lee Hill as woke tattoo boy and making the claim, much like you have, that no teacher should have a tattoo. They should be rounded up and sacked if they have tattoos. And here's Lee. There's a bit of controversy about this picture. We'll probably be in trouble for using it because the gentleman that took it pointed out that nobody'd asked his permission, least of all GMTV or GM. I don't know.
GMB,
GM,
GMB.
yeah, something. I've never seen it, but apparently it's a popular morning TV program.
You never get up in time.
Well, I'm listening to the Today program,
Of
Martin, like
course.
all educated people.
Well, this is it. It's about class, isn't it? I mean, when
Uh,
when I was a kid, people who had tattoos were oiks and renegades and hooligans and vandals and Hell's Angels and things like that. And it's sort of become, I think it's the about 10 years younger than me and beyond. It's become something that's far more middle class and trendy and different types of tattoo, mind you. I think that this sort of tattoos I saw when I was a kid have slightly been replaced by more, people might say, artistic
yeah,
tattoos these days.
tattoos are now, or a certain kind of tattoo is
Mm,
anyway, very much an emblem of the middle classes. And for instance, both my daughters are determined to get tattoos sooner or later, and sometimes spend time designing them for themselves. And I think that they're so mainstream, they're so common, and I use that not in the sense of being vulgar, but in the sense that they're just everybody has them. They're unremarkable. I think
well,
that.
not everyone has them. I mean, again, but there's a certain thing, isn't there? If a teacher has a tattoo and it's you can't see it, then that's nobody's business but their own, is it? It's when you start to sort of perhaps go over certain. Well, I've got a picture. Have we got the picture of a tattooed personage?
Yeah,
Now, there's two things
nothing
about
wrong with
this I
that,
want
is
to
there?
say. First of all, if a teacher had tattoos all over their head, now bearing in mind a lot of these people might have tattoos before they go into the professions, would that be a good thing for a teacher to have? But there's something else about this pic, and it get into the content of what's in a tattoo. Now here he's got a number on his face, which is sort of alluding to far right organizations. Now, it's not just the tattoo itself, it's where it is and perhaps what its content is. Now, a tasteful tattoo on the shoulder, like yours, we can get him down now and perhaps go back to me
Yeah,
talking. We've got enough of him now.
let's get rid of the there we
We've
are.
got a tasteful tattoo on the shoulder, or indeed an untasteful tattoo on the shoulder, is nobody's business at all. Tattoos all over the face might be another level.
There was
Perhaps
that,
love and
remember.
hate over there might be a different thing as well. But also the content. If you had a swastika on your forehead or something like that, people would start to object to these things.
Yeah.
So it's a bit more. There's a few grey areas here. It's not
Oh,
completely black and white.
there are grey areas. That you're right. And do you remember there was, I think, the tail end of last year, there was the case of a French primary teacher who wasn't allowed to teach because of his heavy facial tattoos, and he obviously thought that was very unfair. And other people took the view that, well, if you wanted to teach primary school children, you shouldn't look like a horror show, and difficult conversations ensued. But I think so. I remember actually the first time I had a colleague who had very visible tattoos, and I remember feeling a little bit taken aback, a bit surprised by that. But I think that certainly in the sort of 10 or 15 years since that, it's become not uncommon for teachers to have visible tattoos. And I remember, every now and again during the summer when I had a sort of thin white shirt on, occasionally children would say, "Have you got a tattoo, sir? Can we see a tattoo?" And I would just deny it. I would go, "No, it's not a tattoo. You're imagining things," and they'd get very incensed by that. Anyway,
But
enough.
joking aside, I mean there is some element here about what a teacher's role is, and if
Mm,
it's a teacher's role is to set an example, which part of the teacher's code, you sign up for having a certain standard of behavior even outside of school nowadays, then should you look at how number one, your behavior in terms of legality, but also in terms of perhaps being slightly more conservative figure than perhaps some teachers would wish to be.
Well, I can see the line you're ploughing here, Martin, and I think you're setting yourself up for public vilification because the backlash, again, by following the Edu Twitter um, hashtag, I'll get used to it one day. You can see all sorts of people sort of actually commenting. We've got one tweet that we'll show you that they wanted to remind people, that teachers, that this was actually about whitewashing, that tattoo teacher aren't the victims, it isn't about us. And what she's talking about here is that there is some background to Lee Hill attracting the ire of Piers Morgan, isn't there, Martin?
Yeah, I mean, this takes us into perhaps a more serious matter, perhaps. And it's something we touched on a couple of weeks ago as well, and that's the names of houses in schools.
Yes, you'd think a house by any other name would smell as sweet, wouldn't you, Martin?
You see, you got the Shakespearean. Um, Lee Hill's school, which I think I've just got something here somewhere, is in East Yorkshire. It's Howden Junior School in East Yorkshire. Had at least 3 houses called Raleigh, Drake, and Nelson. Names that I conjure up my youth as well, of sorts of people.
You were around, weren't you, in
I was
the
around when
19th century? Yeah.
I was on Plymouth Hoe or whatever. Anyway, they've replaced those names with Greta Thunberg, I think it is, Marcus Rashford, Malala, people who perhaps are more down with the kids, you could argue. Now, not saying anything about whether the first 3 or the latter 3 are any good as citizens or whatever, but should school houses reflect the times? Or should again they be sort of bastions of the past and say these are the standards we wish to uphold? I mean, Marcus Rashford might even have tattoos for all I know. So
No.
we got we got now, these people here could be tomorrow's cancelled people, should we say, in the parlance of the culture wars. At some point, Greta Thunberg might say something which is controversial, and Howden Junior School and other schools might have to whip her name out from the houses list. So I think we've got all sorts of problems if we're starting to bend our house names into the national debate.
Yeah, we did talk about this, as you say, on a recent episode where one of the house names that was being replaced was Rowling House, because of the concern that J.K. Rowling may or possibly may not be. It seems to be a matter of an opinion to be a TERF, a radical anti-trans rights feminist, and clearly she says she's not, and lots of people believe that is, and the school decided to well, I don't know actually what I think they decided to replace in that case the house names with local beauty spots or something like that, which seems
Yeah,
pretty neutral. But one of the things we've mentioned there is that is exactly the point that you've just alluded to, Martin. But by picking a current person like J.K. Rowling, we're setting ourselves up perhaps for the very fate that you outlined. One of the points that Morgan was making was that, I believe, if you can follow his logic, was that it's not that there's nothing problematic about such figures as Sir Walter Raleigh and Nelson and all the rest of it. It's that schools should take the responsibility of telling the unvarnished truth about them. They should say that these people did have an important role to play in the history of our country, and here are the things that we might object to, but here are the reasons that they have historically been celebrated. And I've got some sympathy with that, but then that's not necessarily a good enough reason to have them as house names. And I think that one of the other things, and I don't know whether you think this is true or not, Martin, is that when I started as a teacher, house names seem to have disappeared. There weren't school houses. When I was a lad, we had houses at school, and in the intervening years, they'd gone into the ether. And more recently, it became suddenly popular. And I think maybe, arguably, with the advent of Harry Potter, house names became de rigueur wasn't 10.
That's
And
ironic, isn't it? Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think certainly forms took over from houses as the way of organising, and year groups rather than organising sort of vertically. But vertical housing and various other things were still there, I think, for some people's sports days, and that was
mm,
about it, wasn't it? I certainly would object, perhaps, if houses had their names changed just willy-nilly. I mean, if you've got a school that has houses going back centuries in some
right.
cases, then I think there's a pretty good argument for keeping those house names as they are. It's a way of connecting people, ex-pupils right the way through to current pupils and future pupils. It's a way of keeping the tradition going. But the future, sorry, I've got lots of noise going on here. Some drilling next door and some shouting next door. So this is inner city London life for you. Um, but if we're going to change the names of houses to people's names, I think that's where it gets complicated. Which is why I think if you're going to have houses, name them after local areas, local beauty spots, or whatever. But three names, Raleigh, Drake, Nelson. You could say that's a bit dead white men, certainly, couldn't you?
Well, you could certainly say it's a bit dead white sailors, couldn't you?
Yes, dead white sailors. And what could we name our houses after instead? Well, why not Greta Thunberg, Rashford, and Milana? I mean, why not? And next week, let's
Yeah.
take on whoever's in the news next week.
Well, yeah, I know what you're saying there, and absolutely take the point that that some schools house names have a long and rich tradition. I think the point I was trying to make is that for many schools, they don't. They're fairly recent
Yeah,
addendums, and so whether you change the name or not was fairly arbitrary and meaningless. And
yeah,
I don't care that much. I think that some of the independents with house names that have been around a long, long time, they're named after houses
yeah.
where students were housed, and then it makes complete sense to keep those. Introducing them into modern comprehensive schools, what's that about? It's some sort of odd fashion, really. Maybe get rid of houses. Maybe that would be better.
Well, I still quite like them. I think it gives some sort of identity within the school. And if you do have house competitions or
Yeah.
house events, then I think if you just have them and there's no reason for having them, then forget it. But if there's part of the pastoral organisation of the school, and like I say, competitions, then by all means use them, and you have your house badge. Yeah,
Sure.
whatever. I think in the junior school, I was in Falcon's house in my secondary school. I was in, I think it was Isis
Well,
House,
in
something
my
like that.
junior school,
Rivers and birds.
I was in Clent, which was a local hill. I remember, what were the others? Clent, Licky. I can't remember the others now. It was in Birmingham. And then in my secondary school, I was in Chad. And the schools are all named after Catholic
Catholic
saints, dead
saint.
white male Catholic saints, I should add.
There you go.
And then, we're joking, but then we've got one thing that came out this week was that people of ethnic minorities distrust the education sector far more than we might have expected. We've got a graph here to look at with some facts and figures on, and you can see the first set of columns there is the trust that different sections of the society have for UK Parliament, and you can see there the blue figure is the general population who trust, and the orange is distrust, and the green figure are Black British. And you can see there that if you are Black British, you're far more likely to feel treated unfairly by UK Parliament. Not so interestingly, it looks like the local council come out a lot better. It's a bit more 50-50. The local police force, I mean, that's such a problem. The fact that Black British people see the police as treating them unfairly, and then the NHS is obviously perceived to be doing a better job. And then a little bit shocking to see those figures from the education system, that 40 is that, I can't, 46%, I think it is, of Black British people think that the education system is treating them unfairly, compared to only 8.3% in the general population. What do we
Yeah,
make of this, Martin?
I think it's 48.8%. I think the this is shocking, really, and it should be a wake up call for all of us, and that's quite a good way of looking at it there. If we just focus in on that, you can see the 48.8. And that's saying it treats black black Britons think the education system treats them unfairly, and
Mm,
I think that that's something that is behind why people want to change the names of houses, if you like. But it's almost these sort of things surrounding it is not addressing the central problem, which is something that has to be more about the way that education is part of the whole, if you like. Education is part of the whole of society. It's not just separate to society. And if we have houses that can just sort of named after Marcus Rashford, is that going to change that figure? I don't think so. These are systemic, I'm going to use that word, problems within the system, obviously. And part of this, I think, far more interesting than names of houses is curriculum content, about how we approach curriculum. And that's not just about Black British History Month or anything like that, or Black History Month. It's more about empire. It's more about looking at society as a whole, as how white and black work together, have history together, have literature together, and becomes part of the conversation. It's not something which is always pocketed over to names of houses or a history month here and a history month there.
mm. No, I think you're right. It'd be interesting to see those figures broken down by different groups as well. Do people of different classes feel that these different elements of society treat them more or less fairly? And what about different ethnic minorities as well? It would be interesting to see these things. But the fact that Black British people in particular feel this sense of distrust, or that they're not given, they're not treated fairly, at least, is that perhaps down to an underrepresentation of black people amongst the teaching profession? Do we need more black teachers?
I think it's something that we should talk about, and it's something that certainly two white men like you and me talking about it is not necessarily going to get it very far. But it could be also an urban problem as well, certainly
Yeah.
in terms of schooling in the big city,
Uh,
how perhaps in the past, and again, this is not just the youth of today, after all this is going back a few years of people's attitudes. The way that black kids were treated in the last few decades, I don't know, might have been slightly different to how they're being treated today. So I think we really do need to look into
that's
it
true.
In a more subtle way than just us two talking about it and trying to
Well, of
reach
course.
to conclusions
Well, of
there.
course. Anyway, it's a starting point for a conversation. We're agreed that it's a shocking statistic, and more needs to be discussed and thought about it. So over to you. So the next item that we've got for discussion on the show tonight is the fact that we've been waiting weeks for the DFE Ofqual consultation to report, and this week they said basically, it doesn't matter what you do, crack on. Teachers, do what you like. Schools, it's completely over to you. You are being, and the rhetoric in the reporting has been that teachers are to be trusted, and I think that certainly, having discussed this with a number of different teachers, I think there's a sense of, well, if it goes wrong, guess who's going to be blamed? There's that kind of sense of, actually, maybe this is because nobody wanted to risk coming up with something that might get them blamed instead. But what do we think about this, Martin? Is it a good thing to trust teachers, or is it unfair to put so much responsibility on teachers?
Well, I think the first instance, we've got to look at how long it took to get to this point that we thought was going to happen anyway, quite a long time ago. And also why they haven't yet announced what they're going to do next year, but except put doubt in people's mind about next year already as well. You know, that these things should be decided longer term than just sort of thrown in at the end of February. Here you go, this is what's going to happen. But it was inevitable. It's something which is easier for people to manage, because when you start to look down on it and trying to centralize things about content, some people have had this content, some people have had that content, some people, you get into all sorts of problems. So the easiest thing to do is say, let teachers decide, let teachers sort it out. Then, of course, you get other problems, which is how fair is the marking going to be? It might be perfectly fair for that child in that school, but not necessarily that child compared to the child who is similar to them in the school down the road. And that's where things are going to go horribly wrong.
You've got you made a little recording, didn't you, of one of the execs at Ofqual on the telly this week. Should we it's very, very short. Let's quickly play that video if we can.
In-class assignment and so on. So actually, in some ways, I think we will end up with results that are more valid than a normal year.
What role has
There we are. Simon Liebus, interim chief regulator. And so he's talking there about validity, and I think it's probably worth us spending a little bit of time exploring what he might mean by that. And so what I think is going on here is that typically when we assess students using examinations, they sit those examinations and markers mark them, and the grade is derived from students' performance on those exam papers. And what's being proposed basically is that teachers perhaps use mock exams, perhaps use work completed in class, perhaps under time conditions, perhaps not, and put together a portfolio of what students have produced, and from that work out what grade they think they should have got. And Liebus's point here is that with all of these diverse sources of information contributing to the judgment that's being made, that increases the validity. And by validity, what we mean is, well, let's have a bit, because it comes at it's often traded off against something else, reliability. And we've got a little graphic here to show you to illustrate the difference. So the first of these targets is shows measurement which is unreliable and invalid, somebody basically randomly firing at a target. The second target shows something which is reliable but invalid. So we can see we're getting a reliable measure. Things are clustering around a certain point, but it isn't actually on target, so it's not valid. Arguably, and this is what some people's objection is with examinations, and then obviously what we're aiming for, what we all want, is reliable and valid assessment with everything as close to being on target as possible. So that's what we're aiming for. The current examination system has, well, it doesn't have particularly high reliability even. So for essay-based subjects like English and history and these sorts of things, they have a reliability of about somewhere between 0.6 and 0.7, which basically means that 60 to 70% of the time, a different examiner would give the same grade as another examiner, which means, of course, that 30 to 40% of the time, that's not going to be the case. And so there's quite a bit of tolerance for error in the way that we assess currently. And one of the points is that we should make clear is that this reliability is going to be a lot lower without the standardizing oversight of the exam boards and the regulator. So I'm not sure. Is that you? Is that drilling your end, Martin?
Yeah, it's drilling. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. I wondered if it was you.
No, it's still going on. There's it's on the wall downstairs next door. This is terrace houses, as I said earlier. This is part of the delights of living in Southeast London, mate.
Here in the southwest, living in heavily.
You're so detached there, aren't you?
Very detached, and detached from everything.
Exactly.
We've got no idea what's going on over here. So
what are we talking about? Reliability.
We trade off reliability and validity. So maybe this is the argument that Liebus is making, is that we're going to have a lot lower reliability, but is that okay if validity is increasing?
It's an odd one, this, isn't it? Because you would hope that the two would be synonymous with each other. Let's give example of a practical arts exam, so a drama exam. Now, let's say you want your exam to be practical and you want to measure someone's acting ability and to say that they are a good actor compared to someone who isn't such a good actor. You'd think it'd be simple. And to some extent, this is how it should be, shouldn't it? But then all of a sudden you try and give that the difference between a 6, 7, 8, 9, then the problems start. And then you sort of add to it, well, that teacher doesn't get enough 9s, or that school doesn't get enough 8s, or whatever it happens to be. Then the whole structure starts to wobble. And the more it wobbles, the more people want the examinations to be reliable. So the practical drama exam becomes more and more reliable by becoming less and less a practical drama exam. It becomes, in other words, an academic written exam. And the practical drama exam has moved. I think it's something like 70% of it to 80% of it is now written work.
Yeah.
And that sort of gives you a sort of idea of how these things have moved over time. The exam might be more reliable as an exam in itself, but it's not a reliable exam at all when it comes to practical drama.
No, and this is and so this is the validity issue. That it depends what we want, for instance, drama or art or music to be. Do we want them to be academic subjects where they're assessed via writing, or do we want them to be practical assessments assessed via performance? And you're absolutely right to say that if we can increase the reliability by making them perhaps more essay based, but not that much. But the as everybody's favourite educationist Dylan William often says, validity isn't a property of a test or an exam. Validity is a property of the inferences that we make. So if we're inferring from students' written drama exams that they're, for instance, a good actor, then that would be an invalid inference. But if we're inferring from it that they have responded well to the subject as an academic subject, then that would be a more valid inference. And so validity is perhaps more complicated than all of this really allows us to get at. But anyway, the situation is that here are schools and teachers now required to work out students' grades through whatever process they feel fit. And nobody's, but part of the debate has been, should teachers be trusted? Maybe we should, maybe teachers know their students better than anyone else, and that may well be true. But what teachers don't know is anybody else's students and students in different schools, and being able to compare their students against students that they'll never meet or know anything about is impossible. And therein lies the problem. And one of the problems, and that we've identified, well, for if you're doing a GCSE and you've got to get a particular grade in order to study that subject at the next level, then you could, there are all sorts of problems that arise. The biggest problem perhaps is that the teachers and schools are incentivized to be generous, let's say.
Well, yeah, and not only that, they're going to have all sorts of unconscious biases that
Mhm.
you can't argue against that. They will do. You do as a human being. They are human. Teachers are human. So
I've heard that.
they're going to look at not only the kids they just generally think, oh, they do well, but they're going to take on board what has happened over the last few months and who has done well online with the work that's come through. So even that is sort of now biased towards a certain students who perhaps are more self-motivated, have have at home the right equipment at home,
Mm.
who have fewer distractions, perhaps are more focused. Now that might be what you want. But all these biases will come in. So we don't know whether the pupils who are going to do well in the exams are those who would have done well in the exams had this pandemic not happened, had home education not happened, we don't know if that's going to take place. We don't know if those biases are just within, oh, I always liked him, I always liked her, or whatever that's going to be there. And of course, we talked about it earlier, class and race and
Mm.
gender might take part of this as well, that people's unconscious biases might play out in ways that disadvantage certain groups.
Yeah, no, and there are a number of studies which demonstrate very unwelcomely and very distressingly that ethnic minority children are likely to be unfairly biased against by teachers' judgments. And I don't think the suggestion is that people are doing this deliberately, but unconsciously, and not because they're unprofessional, but as you say, Martin, because they're human, and this is something that people do. There are all sorts of well-known psychological effects, such as the idea of the halo effect, where you look at one aspect of a person's character or appearance and make unreasonable judgments about unrelated ideas. So one of the things that's been
Like
investigated.
tattoos.
Pardon me?
Like tattoos. It's all right. Carry on.
Like tattoos. No, you're absolutely right. And so one of the things that's been there we are. One of the things that's been investigated is the fact that, can we take that away? Thank you. One of the things that's been investigated is that teachers are prone to assuming that children who are well spoken and well dressed are more intelligent, and clearly those things don't correlate directly. But this is maybe something that part of our unconscious bias.
And
Um,
exams work against this. I mean, exams, because they are examined by strangers, that this helps. So perhaps somewhere along the line, we could have asked schools to mark other schools' work, or take into account some sort of moderation across federations of schools, or I don't know, contrasting work online. You could look at it and sort of put it into some sort of, no more. This sounds like an advert for a certain company who does this sort of thing. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I know the company to which you refer, and I think they're doing quite well out of this,
Mm.
actually. But yeah, no, I mean, it's really difficult. The fact that this was predictable, in fact, it was predicted, and that we've left it until now to say, actually, we haven't got any idea what to do. Do what you want, is just seems absolutely reprehensible and inexcusable.
And how many kids will be going to university clutching a wad of 9s and 8s and say, "Here you go, Oxbridge. Here you go, posh unis."
Well, do we care? Do we care about that? I've always sort of been slightly affronted at the idea that the part of the purpose of school is to make it slightly easier for universities to work out who should go and who should not. So I don't mind that universities have got a tougher job in this particular respect.
It's an odd one, isn't it? We moan and bemoan so much the 11 plus and how unfair that is, but the 18 plus, we seem to almost celebrate it every year.
Yeah, we absolutely do. Apart from obviously Jeremy Paxman, who tells everyone that if they've got really wealthy parents, they'll be fine. No, you're absolutely right. It's going to be tough for universities or employers perhaps to know who they should recruit and who they should be turning down. Whether and when we're thinking about the education system being perceived as treating certain groups unfairly, this I'm sure will include universities, and maybe this is an opportunity for universities to deliberately and explicitly be biased in favour of children from more difficult socioeconomic status and different ethnic minority backgrounds.
It's happening in grammar schools. I mean, that is actually being asked of grammar schools,
Yeah.
as far as I'm aware. Recently, it's certainly been mooted that because 11 pluses haven't been done, or haven't been done as well, or whatever, that some grammar schools should have a better ethnic mix and a better class mix that comes out of it, and should be working the biases, if you like, in that way. Hey,
So we shall see. We shall see. I mean, I think what we're predicting is that grades will increase and be inflated this year. As lots of people say, does it really matter? I think one of the things that we have to be mindful of, that it feels lovely and great to be generous to this year's cohort in light of everything that they've experienced. But we also have to be aware that if we're generous just to one cohort, then future cohorts and previous cohorts are disadvantaged as a result, because their results don't marry up. So that, that in times to come, we're not going to be comparing like with like. And so it's the invisible people who are being disadvantaged, the things that the people that are hard to see that
I
make.
think I get what you mean. I quite like the idea of invisible people being disadvantaged.
So, yes, okay. Some of the
How many
people
we got?
who, yeah, I won't bother trying to re-explain that. If you get it, Martin, that's good enough for me. So there we are. We're waiting to hear. I mean, this is one of the other astonishing things. We're waiting to hear what exam boards are going to do. They've got another 4 weeks to tell us how they're going to help. But I can see you're making a visual point here about masks. Should we be wearing masks or not? A week or so ago, there was an announcement from the government that children would be going back to schools on the 8th of March, and they would have to wear masks.
In
No
classrooms.
question about it. And then this week, an article in the Sunday Times revealed that schools would not be allowed to enforce the wearing of masks. It would be, well, up to somebody other than the school head teacher, the teachers, children themselves, parents, who the hell knows?
Well, you're in a position now where the teacher could say, or the school head teacher could say, put your masks on, and a kid could say, no, you can't make me. And then it could be rather difficult, shall we say, because you've undermined them straight away. Here they all are with the, oh, for goodness sake. Can we get rid of the did you see some of the so a kid could refuse to put a mask on and then say, well, the government says I don't have to. School immediately the discipline falls apart within the school, saying, well, we say you should. But there are difficulties wearing masks. I mean, if you do have difficulty breathing, putting a mask on is not easy. If you have difficulty hearing, it's not easy to hear what people are saying, but also to lip read. That's why some people have those those see-through masks, which I think all teachers should be provided with if they're going to be asked to mask up in school. So what to do? I don't know where we are now. Have we got masks in school colours? Are they being sold in uniform shops?
Yeah, this is one of the difficult things, isn't it? Because if schools are not allowed to say to students that they have to wear masks, why do we then say that they're allowed to make those decisions about other things that students are expected to wear? Why are they allowed to say that they have to wear a blazer or a particular color sock or whatever else it is that they make decisions on? And we, as a society, we take for granted that schools have uniforms, whereas that's not the case in many other countries. But there seems to be some sort of weird inconsistency here.
And we could even go back to tattoos. What about if school kids have tattoos? Do they
They're
put a plaster?
made to have tattoos, Martin.
They do, but also this strange thing which you see quite a lot now, is more than one piercing. So if you've got more than one piercing, you've got to put a plaster on it, which is quite de rigueur now in quite a few schools.
And other rules about haircuts. So if your haircut's too short,
Well, you can't now, can you? You can't get a haircut. So what are they going to say about haircuts?
well, yes, but the skin fade is banned in some schools. Obviously, your hair would be banned everywhere that civilized people are expected to.
But you could say, but Boris Johnson's hair.
Boris Johnson's hair's slightly neater than yours, I think, at the Martin.
Well, at this precise minute.
It's a low end, Martin. I have to say. And on that subject, I can't remember the name now, but somebody got in touch to say that they'd made a lovely comment about what you should do with your hair, and that I had promised a copy of my book.
That's right.
if they did it. I've sent a copy of my book to Dominic Ryan. Well done, Dom, for both for watching, for commenting, and for nagging me to send you a copy of the book. Absolutely the right thing to do. We
Any
haven't.
comments? Any comments you want to put down below? Please put down below, and you might win all sorts of things. You never know.
Yeah, we're not.
Or
I'm not
not.
making any
You
more
might not win anything.
Can you give something away this time, Martin?
No,
Oh, very ungenerous of you.
I don't know. Let me think. What? A pen.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe a Martin Robinson T-shirt.
A Martin Robinson t-shirt.
Some
And
of your
it's your
Martin
time you're wasting. Merch.
Yeah, Trivium merch. That would be good.
Trivia merch. God.
Oh, anyway, look, we've run out of steam. Thank you once again for watching another time-wasting episode of the show, which does exactly what it says on the tin. It wastes your time. We'll see you and waste even more of your time should you let us next week.
time.
Same time, is it, Martin? 6 o'clock, Friday evenings. Yeah, that's it. Bye-bye.
You can cry and cry until your eyes are red. You can toss and tumble on a sleepless bed, but you're wasting your time.